Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Bernadette Matthews, who is the Principal Research Associate and General Manager of Health Promotion and Communications here at Lifesaving Victoria. She has extensive experience in public health research, specialising in drowning prevention for more than 15 years. Her work spans the epidemiology of fatal drowning, non-fatal drowning and aquatic injury, through to monitoring and evaluation of major public awareness campaigns. She has authored over 15 drowning reports as well as water safety strategies at local, state and international level. She's also our key spokesperson on drowning incidents for Lifesaving Victoria, and in her current role she manages research and health promotion team and the media and communications team here at Lifesaving Victoria, and that's what she's here to talk to us about today, which is managing the media. Thank you.
Thanks, Alec, and thanks everyone for your time today. What I'd like to talk about today, just to give a bit of an overview, is talk about why it's important to manage the media. I think it's something that can often be, something that we think of at the last moment and that sort of side of things. So just highlighting why it's important and going through really the three key areas around preparing, so looking at what you need to plan for, looking at how you manage your initial response, and then looking at that restoring or resolving, so that more medium to long-term response. So firstly, why is it important? And I think some of the things that have been touched on already, there's the potential damage that can come out from either misinformation or speculation, or even no information at all. So not saying anything can be just as damaging. And I think also highlighted at the start is that you can provide support and information about support avenues as well, which is really just as important. We know that negative publicity can have really far-reaching effects. We know that, particularly with social media, misinformation can spread really quickly and be really damaging. And it takes a lot to restore those, those damaging or negative publicity. So really overall, it's that threat to the organisation, to your reputation and standing. And it can also have those damaging effects as well on your staff. So considering all of those aspects on your staff and those implications. In some situations, most situations, people will look to seek blame. Who's responsible? Why did this happen? So we need to be really careful with the information that's being provided. Any sort of admissions or confirmation that there was some sort of negligence can be really damaging and can result in potential litigation as well. So being really careful with the information that's being provided. So really the three key things, as I said, to touch on are around that, and I'll focus particularly around a critical incident, but obviously, as has been highlighted, there are a number of different incidents where there may need to be a media response. Looking at that preparation, the management, and as I said, the restoration phase. So I really can't emphasise enough the importance of planning and preparing for these things. There's been some discussion already around, scenarios and those sorts of things. Probably throw the question out to everyone. When you're doing your scenarios, do you include in those scenarios the next step as far as contacting or communication with the media? Does your person at reception know what to do in these scenarios? If the centre needs to be closed, does your person at reception know what to do? Do your third-party providers know what to do? So the person in the cafe that might get a telephone call, the gym, those sorts of areas. Does everyone know what to do in these scenarios? So when we're looking around the planning, really important looking at the processes and procedures in place. So having a crisis communications plan, establishing your core team responsible and a clear chain of communication, and ensuring that your team know that chain of communication is really critical. Ensuring that your staff know what to do, what they shouldn't do as well is really important, and where to go for information and what their roles are. Establishing procedures for ensuring that information is complete, accurate and approved for public release. So again, there'll be different categories depending on different incidents. Understanding what the procedures are for all of those. You might, for example, have approved, you'll have your background information, and then you'll have what your approved information is from a public perspective. Looking at what your internal and external approvals are, and your internal and external stakeholder dissemination and communication. So what are you getting out to your teams in the first instance, and looking at that support and those sorts of things, and then looking at what's being provided more publicly. Also really important to take that step back and make sure that you already have things like a media or a social media policy, so that people know that, that they shouldn't automatically be going out and posting something on Instagram or what have you, or on Facebook, so that they already know that. That's already part and parcel of their role, that they understand. As I said, looking at doing a test run. So add this into your scenarios if it's not already in there. What's the number to call? You've got your list of phone numbers of who you need to call. Who do you need to call from a communications perspective? Is it someone from head office? Who is it that's going to manage this from a communications perspective? And also seek expert help. If this is not something that's already in place, work through with experts around what are the best processes and procedures to have in place. The other thing is looking at already having key spokespersons identified. So looking at who are your primary, secondary, tertiary spokespeople for these sorts of scenarios, and look at almost a matrix for different incidents as well. Who is going to respond, and if, for example, someone's on leave, who is going to be the next person that you call to be your spokesperson. Make sure that they've had media training and that they do regular refreshers as well. And also it's important to build and maintain those relationships with the media. So important that you already have those positive relationships that you can draw on people from that perspective. So if we look at the management side of things, so really it comes back to then enacting your plan. So what are the immediate short-term and medium-term things that you need to do? When you're looking at the immediate, you want to really be controlling the narrative, and you don't need to come out with something really extensive. It's usually something very brief. So you want to establish the facts, and that's where often we'll look to Victoria Police. They'll release a statement of the facts. Repeat those statement of the facts. Have an agreed public statement or having holding lines as well. So establish the facts, keeping it very brief, and as I say, looking to say Victoria Police in what facts are appropriate to release at that time. It's also important to, if you're looking at that initial statement that you might give, looking at obviously providing that, your thoughts and condolences really are with the family and all of those involved, the staff, those that have responded to the incident. So it's important to recognise that, but it's also important for a critical incident to note that the case is before the coroner, and so you can't comment further. And I think that's really important as well, is ensuring that you maintain that balance. So you have, the balance between being transparent but allowing the process to run its course. So WorkSafe have their role, Ambulance Victoria, Victoria Police, and the Coroner's Court. You need to let that process run its course. So make your initial statement, but recognise that the incident is before the coroner, so you can't comment further. Really important to make sure you gain approvals before you go ahead with any public statement. Make sure that you have a timely response. Again, if you take too long to respond, you tend then, particularly with the media, they'll try and fill the void in the hole there if you don't respond. So making sure you provide a timely response, and often it's a comment or a statement that you provide. In the short term, so after that initial response, and depending on the type of incident, the type of media that you might be getting and the inquiries that you might be getting, you might need to look at a further response. You may need to look at a media release or a briefing. Ideally, you don't want to do that. Really, as I say, if it's a major incident and it's gaining major media attention, you may need to do this. Again, coming back to that controlling the narrative. So you may put out a media release, you may have a briefing. If you do have a briefing, make sure you have really good talking points and your spokesperson sticks to those talking points. You don't deviate from those talking points. And if you don't understand or if they don't have an answer to a question, that they admit that and they move on. Then in the medium to long term, it's looking at that, monitoring what's coming through from a media perspective and following up any responses. A few do's and don'ts I thought I'd go through as far as from a media perspective. And this really depends on where you are, I guess, in the process, whether you're dealing directly with the media. But so make sure you're sticking to the facts, gain appropriate approvals, ensure a timely response. Also make sure you provide all media with the information. It's not the time to, I said you need to have those relationships with the media. It's not a time to provide an exclusive or anything like that. You're providing that information out to everyone. Ensure consistency and continuity of communication. So you have your key holding statement, that's what you stick with. Ensure you have an appropriate voice and tone. So as I mentioned before, we need to be considerate that we're dealing with someone, family members, someone's lost their life here. So ensure that you have the appropriate tone, and ideally you have one voice. If you're having to do multiple communications, you want the one person that is communicating out to people. Respond really quickly, so if there's any misinformation, get onto it really quickly. If you are talking to the media, even if it's just it seems like a quick casual phone call, as often it will, if you're speaking to a journalist, consider yourself on the record all the time. Even if they say you're not on the record, consider that you are. Some don'ts. Don't speculate about the incident, what you think might have happened, or things like that. Even if you think that might help, don't speculate. Don't allow anyone who's unauthorised to release information. Don't try to cover up facts or mislead the media again. Even if you think that might be helping, that will not help. And obviously don't assign blame for the incident. As I mentioned, it's really important to get that balance and to let the process run its course. Then just to finish up, looking at that sort of restoration and recovery phase, really looking at, and this is if you have an incident where, say it's gone to a coronial inquest or there's a finding that's been released and there may be recommendations made. So looking at what is the organisation doing in response. And for these things you have a bit more time, obviously. It's not that immediate, we have to get a statement out. You can take the time to look at what your response is. Look at what your outcomes are. What are your prevention strategies? What are you doing from a risk management perspective? Any updates there? Clearly outline the process and the timeline so people can understand this is what we're doing to address it. You can really help to restore that public confidence. If you say, yes, we've recognised there's been a recommendation made, we agree to the recommendations, or you can respond to the recommendations and say, this is what we're doing to address it. We're doing it within this time frame, we are following this process, so people can get that reassurance and get that faith back in the organisation. And ensure you provide a transparency in your response. So it might be that you disagree with the coronial recommendation for whatever reason. You do need to respond within 3 months and provide your reasoning for whether you will take on that recommendation or not. So providing a really clear, if you're not going to take on a recommendation for a particular reason, provide the reasons for that and be really clear in that. And ensure that ongoing follow-up, monitoring and evaluation, and probably really just to finish up, the importance, really honing back on the planning and preparation. Hopefully you don't need to use this. Ideally, you have all these other things in place, you won't have to go down this path. So the prevention side is really, really key. Thank you.